hit that record button just so you're all aware.
You're cutting out a lot. You're cutting out a lot.
What? Why? Why can't we be not cutting out? If you can't hear me, just tell me and I'll zoom. I'll just close Google Earth. I also have the closed captioning on, should help. So I'm monitoring my iPad, and when I look at my iPad, I don't see anything. Is that what you guys see? Just a blank screen? There we go. Okay, here we go. So I wanted you to see that sewage treatment plant because that's where we send our sewage in the city of Verona. We used to have our own sewage treatment plant, but most of Dane County now sends their sewage all the way over to Nine Springs. So I want to run through a couple of things in chapter 14 with you quickly. And holy moly, she's running slow, isn't she? Come on. I get to blame the school, everyone. It's not me or my home computer. Okay, so once you, wow, that is really running slow. Allison, is it really running slow?
Yeah, kind of.
Oh, geez. All right, so I'm gonna take this off quickly. So I want to talk about water pollution here, if we can get this computer to load. Oh, goodness sakes, everyone. Hopefully everybody had a good weekend. This is the week to get outside. It's going to be beautiful out. And I want to point a couple of things out here. So please write some stuff down, or I don't know, you can watch this recording later, whatever you want to do. So the two words on this screen that are important, you should absolutely know. Number one is point source, and the second is non-point source. So when we talk about water pollution, very commonly these terms are applied, and they describe where the pollution is coming from. And in the one case, point source, you're able to locate very distinctly the source of pollution. And in the second case, non-point, it is less obvious. And so I put a couple examples of this on the screen. One of the most common examples would be a factory near a river. I don't know why, but very commonly when our country was young and factories were being constructed, they like to construct them near water. Well, I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the water was used as a way to transport the goods that were produced. And then the second thing, very commonly, water is needed in the production of various industrial products. And so when you're finished as a factory, and you have waste, it's very convenient to dump that waste into a body of water, in particularly a body of like a river, because then the waste goes downstream and it disappears. So that type of waste you're able to pinpoint very directly. You can trace the waste to a specific source. The second type is a little bit less obvious, and it can be anything related to erosion or agriculture. When there's a manure, like manure getting into streams or lakes, that can be less obvious because there may be many farms along the source of water. So we call that non-point. Okay. And we've talked about some of these already, but when we think about problems associated with wastewater, we're talking about three main problems. The first is oxygen demand, and we talked about the Gulf dead zone extensively. So I think that one you should have a pretty good understanding of. Nutrient release, which is related to the oxygen demand. And then the last type are disease-causing organisms. And the disease-causing organisms are commonly related to human waste. So we talked about this, the dead zone. Also, we talked about this concept of eutrophication. A eutrophic body of water is a body of water that is overly fertile, which causes huge algae blooms. The algae dies, the bacteria consume the algae, and then use up all the available oxygen. This is one that we haven't talked as much about. And when we talk about wastewater, the wastewater in particular is human waste. Any organism that eats meat in particular, if you are a meat eating organism, the bacteria that you house within your body, we all have bacterial colonies within our bodies. The bacteria that consume meat within your body, in your intestines, in your digestive system, tend to be more deadly if consumed than bacteria that are associated with vegetarian type animals. And so we are meat eaters, and our waste contains the bacteria that as long as they're in your body, not harmful. But if they enter, as long as they're in your digestive system, not harmful. But if they enter your body any other way, it can cause real problems. The type of bacteria that are very commonly looked for, also known as an indicator species, are the fecal coliform bacteria. And yes, it's exactly what you think they are. They originate in the human intestines. Eee. And so here's the idea. When wells are tested, or when restaurants are tested for sanitation and cleanliness, they look for this type of bacteria. If this bacteria is present, then the assumption is there's other harmful bacteria that are present. And those bacteria can cause death in humans if consumed. Okay, so I want to talk about septic and sewage treatment plants. These are two big ones. And if you live in the country, you probably have a septic system. Everybody else in Dane County sends their waste to the sewage treatment plant. And so the process is actually very similar. The septic system is basically a small scale sewage treatment plant. And so I want to talk to you briefly about how this works. There's really two main parts to a septic tank or septic system. The first is the tank. So any water that comes out of your house, if you live in the country, is going to enter the tank. And the tank is divided into two parts. The first part is just simply the bottom, and it works through gravity. Anything that is large sinks to the bottom and becomes what is referred to as a sludge. And that tank then periodically is emptied. You may have seen driving around these big trucks that look like, like a big tanker truck. And those trucks back up to your septic system, and every couple of years, it just kind of depends on how much traffic you have in your house, that truck empties whatever's in your septic tank. The water that's on the top of the tank is pushed into what is called a leach field. And that leach field spreads that water out over the soil. And then the bacteria that are in the soil process any of the waste that is left in that water. And so the benefits of a septic system are you're using nature essentially to clean the water. And the bacteria that are in your soil are the consumers of any organic waste that's in your home sewage. And that bacteria can process that waste, and as that water infiltrates into the soil, eventually at some depth, you end up with just clean water. And so the soil itself is not only the filtering system, but also the system that consumes any harmful waste. These systems can be built anywhere. There was a time when you had to have a proper soil in order to install a septic system, but now they use what's called a mound system. If you're close to bedrock and you don't have enough soil to process your waste, they just bring in soil so you can build a septic system into a mound. So the sewage treatment plants, these are much more common, and this is really what I just showed you in Madison. We've come a long way, folks. In the old days, when Madison was just a community, a growing community, the first sewage treatment plant was Lake Mendota. And it's hard to believe that people would do this, but when we started to advance in terms of technology, and we did get to a point where we had indoor plumbing, where do you put that waste coming out of your house? For some reason, the logical place at the time was just stick it in the lake. And eventually, of course, that was just icky. And so then the second piece of that, the solution to dumping the sewage in the lake was to just extend the pipe further into the lake. And then eventually we developed this method. And this is very, very effective, by the way. So when you think about the water that comes out of your house, if you took the totality of it, shower, dishwasher, washing machine, sinks, and toilet, 99% of what's leaving your home is just water. Okay, there are solids, there is organic matter in your sewage, but the vast majority of what leaves your house is just water. And so the purpose of the sewage treatment plant is to separate the solids from the water. And at the end of the process, the goal is to have clean water. So if you look at this diagram, things are numbered, and you can see the pipes that run in the middle of the street carry the sewage. Most of that sewage is carried by gravity. In the city of Verona, city of Madison, the location of our sewage treatment plant is because it's the lowest point in Madison. And so you can just point the pipes downhill and all of the sewage eventually runs toward the treatment plant. The first process is called the primary treatment. And again, it's just gravity. So those tanks that you saw in the Google Earth shot that I showed you, the first set of tanks just uses gravity to settle out the solid parts of the sewage. And then the top part is just water, and that part is pushed into the secondary treatment. The solids eventually end up being put into tanks where they're fed to bacteria. Now, I want to stress this point, everybody. This is very important. We use bacteria to consume anything that is in the sanitary sewage. Anything that is organic is just consumed by bacteria. Okay, so if you can imagine what's coming out of your home, think of your shower, your toilet, your dishwasher, your garbage disposal, even toilet paper itself. Anything that is leaving your house that is of organic nature can be fed to bacteria. And the way they do that, if you notice where this says secondary treatment, it almost looks like a little fountain. What they do is they feed that bacteria some starter, and then they give it lots and lots of oxygen, and the bacteria colonies explode, and they essentially feed on our waste. So by the time they're done, there's really nothing left other than bacteria. So you have to deal with the bacteria then. And the way you deal with the bacteria is you just remove the oxygen, and then the bacteria die. So if you go down to number 5 at the bottom, you'll see it says sludge is thickened by removing the water. There's a drying process. And what you end up with is essentially solid dead bacteria. And in Madison and most communities in Wisconsin, that material is turned into fertilizer, and they actually sell it to farmers. They measure the nitrogen and phosphorus content, and they sell that to farmers, and it's applied to fields. So if we go back up to what's left after that initial primary settling, we have the secondary treatment, and they do the exact same thing. So whatever's left in the water is fed to bacteria. That bacteria consume anything that's left. There's an additive placed in the water, which essentially causes all of those bacteria to clump together until they're heavy enough to sink to the bottom. They then turn into the sludge, which is added to the fertilizer. Anything that's left is essentially clean water. That clean water, just as a precautionary measure, is usually exposed to either chlorine. Either they add chlorine to kill anything that's left in the water, or in Madison, they actually pass it through a series of pipes, and those pipes are lined with ultraviolet radiation, ultraviolet light, and that kills any remaining bacteria or pathogens. Then the water is placed in mud. What is it? It's placed in Badfish Creek near Stoughton, and it becomes part of our surface water. So that's essentially the treatment process, and you should be fairly familiar with it. But it's really just settling out solids and feeding the rest of bacteria. That's really what it is. When this water leaves the treatment plant, the assumption is that it is clean water. I mean, it's water you could literally drink. The one negative of this, keep in mind, we're pumping the water out of an aquifer, we clean it, and then we send it downriver. And so when we think about all of this and how it all fits together, it's not a perfect process because we are taking water out of the ground, and instead of putting that water back in the ground when we're done with it, we're putting it into our surface water and we're sending it downriver. Take a look at this for a second. This manure issue is big. In the old days, like my grandpa, who was a farmer, in the old days, he might have, I don't know, a couple dozen cows, and you can make a living off it. My father-in-law grew up on a dairy farm, and his family farm, they had 12 cows. Well, now, Dane County, we have farms with 800 cows, and each cow produces about 100 pounds of manure a day. And so one of the issues as farms have become more industrialized is dealing with the farm waste. And so one of the things that, and farmers have to deal with this, there are regulations that dictate what farmers have to do with this manure. And so if you look at this picture, you'll see a bunch of barns, and then you'll see this huge lagoon that's over here on the right-hand side. That's manure, also known as manure. If you're from the city, you say manure. If you're a farmer, you say manure. And so in recent years, this has become kind of an issue because if we have a big rainfall and that manure, or that lagoon floods, it can spill out and it can pollute streams, rivers, surface water, and other things. And so as we have industrialized, what we end up with are these large confinement areas where the cows essentially never leave the barn or this, confinement area. My grandpa, when he farmed, he used his fields as a place to graze his cows. So every morning he would wake up, he would take his dog to the barn, he would lead the cows out to the field. Okay. They would spend the whole day in the field eating the grass, depositing the manure as they walked around the field. And then at the end of the day, he would lead them back to the barn. Well, now what we do is we use the field to grow mostly corn or other feed. The cows never leave the barn. We bring the feed to the cows, and then we have to deal with the manure. So one of the things that farmers used to do is use a method like this. And this method is called manure spreading. And this method is designed to simply get rid of the manure. The manure does contain nutrients, but in order to accurately credit those nutrients, you have to know exactly what's in your manure, what nutrients are in your manure, how much of those nutrients are actually being applied to each area of the farm. And you can see by this picture, this process is pretty non-exact. So what a lot of farmers have done is they have switched to applying the liquid manure. And you can see in this picture, the manure is injected directly into the soil. The farmer knows exactly what the nutrient content is. And so they can actually credit the manure application against any commercial fertilizer that they might need. So this is really the ideal method. The issue with this method, and when you look at the large industrial farms, this becomes really the limiting factor. The issue is you need a lot of land. And so when you start to examine farm operations that get up into that 700-800 cows per farm, The limiting factor for how big that farm can become is really where they can put their manure. And so you'll see these farms buying more and more and more land, not because they need more land for feed, but they need more land to spread their manure. 100 pounds of manure per cow per day. It's so if you have a farm of 700 or 800 cows, that's the equivalent of a small city worth of waste per day. So that's one half of it. Half of our pollution in this area is related to agriculture. And it's a tough one because, we have a very romantic vision of farming in this country. We look at farmers as and farming as this kind of noble profession, people that work hard, have a sense of independence, and it's all very true. Uh, but it's also an industry, and it's an industry that does have a big impact on the environment. One of the dirty secrets in our country is that we have been able, through industrial agriculture, to reduce how much money we spend on food. So your family might spend anywhere from 10 to 15% of your income, family income, on food. My grandparents spent 30%. So the difference between 30 and 15, okay, what that does is it leaves money so that everybody in your family can have one of these, a little iPhone, right? And it leaves money for us to spend on consumables. And that's what drives much of our economy. So if we talk about farming in terms of what is actually environmentally sustainable, one of the issues we have to discuss then is how much we spend on our food and whether we're willing to spend more on food and less on other consumables, and what impact does that have on our economy. So I want to hit this just really quickly, the heavy metal concept. And lead, arsenic, and mercury are two or three big ones. The lead is really our fault. There was a time in our country when we used lead in industrial applications very commonly. Lead is a very nice metal to work with because it forms easily. You can make it into things like pipes very easily. It's fairly corrosion resistant and it's soft. So it's easy to form and it's easy to work with. And we had a lot of it. Unfortunately, lead does cause brain damage. And we started watching that Flint video in the last class. We're going to finish that in a minute here. And you'll see some of the effects that lead has on the human body, very bad. The other two big ones are arsenic and mercury. And arsenic is naturally occurring. It does some of these pollutants are just naturally occurring. And sometimes there are heavy metals that are naturally found in bedrock, and rainfall leaches those metals into our drinking water. Arsenic is a big one, and especially in the Midwest. Mercury is another big one. Mercury is mostly found in our environment in the burning of coal. So we burn coal in our power plants to produce electricity. Out of the smokestack is emitted all kinds of different stuff, and one of the things is mercury. Now, in our country, we have worked really hard to reduce the amount of mercury that is emitted from coal burning power plants, and we've actually been very successful. Prior to 1970, much, much worse, but we've actually gotten a lot better. And also coal powered fire plants, mostly responsible for acid rain, acid snow, any form of acid precipitation, which does impact our surface water. And that comes mostly from sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. So when you see SO2 or NO2 in any kind of a problem or a question on a test or anything like that, your brain should go right back to coal-fired power plants and acid precipitation. All right, so we better stop there for right now. Let me just see here. Yeah, we better stop there. I want to take a minute here and finish that little video. That you do have a viewing guide. I will collect that. It's just a few questions, but let's turn that in. And Allison, do you wanna throw that assignment at Natalie at this time, and then I'll let her finish that now so she has a little time and doesn't have to use time outside of class. Is that cool, Natalie? All right, where are you? I want to finish this video quickly. I'll try not to stop it too often. There we go. I think we got about 3 or 4 minutes in. And so let's finish the rest of this just as an example of water pollution. I actually have an hour-long video on Flint that I love.
I love you, President Trump. I mean,
oh boy. Why all the ads?
Everything you've done.
Sorry, everyone.
Nobody's accountable.
Okay.
No one's been prosecuted. No one's.
So just to bring you back, this is Flint, Michigan, and Flint has been dealing with a really serious water problem for about 5 years now. And I like Flint as an example for a couple of reasons. One, the socioeconomics in Flint bring up a lot of questions related to something we refer to as environmental justice. And that's a topic that is important and covered on our test, our AP test. And I want to do a little investigation around this concept of environmental justice on Thursday this week. And the second reason I like Flint as an example is because Madison actually was in a similar situation as Flint, Michigan, but reacted very differently. Okay. And so before we're done today, I want to describe something that happened to me in 1998.
No one's served a penalty for this, except for the people of the city of Flint.
For almost 2 years, complaints from the city of 100,000 residents went unanswered, but independent test results were beginning to provide a chilling answer: high levels of lead in the water.
So lead is an irreversible neurotoxin. Once it is in your body, the damage is done.
Dr. Mona Hanna Atisha, director of pediatrics at the Hurley Medical Center in Flint, was one of the first to sound the alarm.
And what we noticed was that after the water switch, the percentage of children with elevated blood levels doubled in the entire city of Flint. And then in some neighborhoods, it actually trickled.
But when she released her findings in September of 2015,
right away, we were attacked. We were told we were wrong, that we were unfortunate researchers, that we were causing near hysteria.
2 weeks later,
why would that be? Rhetorical question. Think for a moment. If you are one of the city officials or state officials, and you are in charge of supplying water to the residents of Flint, if someone who had credibility, a physician, came to you and said, we did a study which revealed that there is lead in the water, we believe, and it's impacting children in Flint, why wouldn't you immediately sound the alarm and try to fix it? Think about that.
later, officials could no longer ignore the signs and officially declared the water unsafe. And this week, the fallout, as over 270 pages of internal emails and documents came to light. It's a damning look into how officials ignored blatant warning signs.
The emergency order was yesterday.
Some of those signs were uncovered by this man, EPA investigator Miguel Del Toro.
I never imagined that this would happen in the first place.
He was one of the first to warn about lead in the water after resident Leanne Walters called in a complaint in early 2015.
Sorry. Another one of the heroes, Miguel Del Toro. He works for the EPA. And again, he's one of the guys that went out of his way to sound the alarm. And then I want to also highlight this young lady, Leanne. She is a resident. And when the officials did not react to these alarms, then she took it upon herself to collect data and start her own protests around the water. We call her a citizen scientist.
15, Del Toro went out to her house to test the water there. What Del Toro found was extremely high levels of lead in the tap water, water that he said was causing Walter's children's hair to fall out in clumps.
I think that if it weren't for Leanne, this may have, gone a lot longer.
After talking to the State Department of Environmental Quality, Del Toro made another stunning discovery. The river water being fed into the taps was not being treated with anti-corrosion agent as required by law.
It's inconceivable that you would allow a system with lead service lines, a large system, not to have the treatment in place.
In the spring of 2015, Del Toro warned the agency that the state was understating the lead levels in the city's water. Writing in a memo, staffers have essentially downplayed or ignored warning signs, and that the whole town may have much higher lead levels than the compliance results indicated. You give them that warning, it seems like they blew you off. Did they not know what they're doing?
I don't know what their decision process was on this.
Internal memos also show that state officials dismissed multiple warnings, spending months denying the lead contamination until October of last year.
It's upsetting to see what's happened there.
Shouldn't have happened.
Shouldn't have happened.
When Dan Wyant, the director of the Department of Environmental Quality, wrote in an email, "I believe now we've made a mistake. Corrosion control should have been required from the beginning."
So just a quick note about that. So, 100 years ago, when water pipes were being installed all over the country, they used lead. Lead was a common metal, and it was commonly used in all kinds of industrial applications, and one of them was to use it as pipes. And so when they built the water pipes for many, many cities across our country, they used lead. Well, later we found out that lead is a poison, and the worst kind of poison possible because it affects the development of children's brains. Okay. So they stopped using lead pipes, but what do you do with all the lead pipes that are currently installed? Well, what they figured out was that they could add some chemicals to the water, and those chemicals would create a film between the water and the lead pipe. And as long as that film was present, then the amount of lead that was leached into the water was either zero or very low. But you have to apply these chemicals. And what happened in Flint, those chemicals were not used. And so instead, you had just a bare lead pipe carrying the water. And then over time, the lead leaches into the water. Now, the reason this is interesting to me, 1998, I was living in Madison on the Isthmus, right near a little park called Orton Park off Williamson Street, on a little street called Morrison. And that's considered one of the oldest parts of Madison. And I got a letter in the mail, and the letter was from the Madison City Council informing me that the coming summer, they were going to be digging up my front yard. And this was a rental property. So they were going to dig up my front yard, and they were going to replace all of the lead pipes that led from the street, the main water in the street, to each individual house. So the city of Madison had years ago replaced all the water mains, the ones that run down the middle of the street. But the ancillary pipes, the ones that connect the water main to each individual house, were still made of lead. And the city council decided to do that. They decided to spend the money to replace every single lead pipe. So here's my question. Why didn't they do that in Flint? In Flint, they left the lead pipes and they chose the corrosion resistant film instead. And this is a common question. And I want you to think about the characteristics of downtown Madison. What are the characteristics of Madison in general and of downtown Madison on the Isthmus? It's a high rent area. It's mostly white. It's very well educated. The University of Wisconsin-Madison, of course, is right down there. And so it's a very well educated community. And would the community have stood for anything less than full replacement of those lead pipes? Okay. So then why didn't they do that in Flint?
The admission has been met with public anger. In a city where more than 40% live below the poverty line, residents are asking if they're being left behind.
If this was a highly generated economy and it was booming here, then yeah, it wouldn't have made it past 3 months.
Flint's water supply has since reverted back to Detroit's Lake Huron, but the damage has already been done. An independent task force conducted a review of the state's handling of the water crisis and found the DEQ's response to the public to be one of aggressive dismissal, belittlement, and attempts to discredit these efforts. The head of the EPA's regional office in Chicago, which covers Michigan, has since resigned after Governor Rick Snyder officially apologized to the residents of Flint.
I say tonight, as I have before, I am sorry and I will fix it.
The apology coming just hours after attorneys filed a class action lawsuit against the governor and state and city officials. But Dr. Hannah Atisha says apologies don't mean that much to a mother wondering what will happen to her child.
So she's traumatized about the consequences of lead, but they're also traumatized about what they've been through the last 2 years, an entire betrayal of governmental agencies.
Or to a city that will have to live with the consequences.
You expect when you turn on your water, you expect it to be drinkable. And you've been told for almost 2 years that it's safe. So there's significant trauma in our community. So we are definitely trying to instill hope.
For Nightline, I'm Alex Perez, Flint, Michigan.
Okay, so that's Flint, and that is lead. That's lead, everyone. And there are 3 little questions that I would like you to answer before you submit that Google Doc to me. Couple of just announcements before we say goodbye. Make sure you're double checking Power School. We have a new policy this year, folks, and I hope you're all aware of it. This is school-wide. Number 1, we're not allowed to penalize you for late assignments anymore. So until this year, what I did in the grade book is I just entered zeros. If a kid was missing an assignment, I entered a 0. And then that 0 would show up in their grade book, and it was just a way for me to get kids' attentions. But now we're really not allowed to do that anymore. So some of you are going to look at the grade book and you might be missing a couple of assignments. They're blank. They're not counted against you. And you think your grade is maybe higher than what it really is. So make sure you're checking the, Power School and getting all your assignments in. I would like you to turn this Flint, Michigan water assignment in today or tomorrow. You can share it to the Canvas or just share it with me to my email. And then tomorrow, I want to give you that group test. It's not really a test. It's more of just a class activity. So it'll cover 9 and 14. On Thursday, I want to do a little environmental justice activity. And then we're going to move into dirt, everyone, this week. So. All right, well, that's all I have. Anybody, recording. If anybody has any